My name is Emma Christine, a 44-year-old housewife whose 32-year marriage to Larry had unraveled into something hollow, childless and devoid of the companionship I once believed in. Our relationship had become little more than a routine, one marked by the absence of true support or affection. I had once imagined us as partners, but over time, that partnership had proven to be nothing more than a facade. The breaking point came when I filed for divorce. In the midst of dividing our assets, I decided to claim the house. Larry, to my surprise, didn't contest my decision. Instead, he walked out of the hospital room where I was receiving treatment for cancer without a word, without so much as a backward glance. His cold indifference stung more than I could ever have anticipated, especially during a time when I needed him most. Left alone in that sterile room, I felt the weight of loneliness settle deep within me. But as the days passed and my illness progressed, something in me shifted. The bitterness I had clung to for so long began to dissolve, as did whatever love I had left for Larry. In its place was a stark clarity. Larry had never been there for me. His selfishness, his inability to offer even a shred of emotional support, had been a constant throughout our marriage. And in that realization, I found myself no longer sad but resolute. For years, I had quietly endured his demands. Even during my illness, he had always expected me to perform my duties as a wife, as if my health or my life mattered less than his comfort. The growing awareness of how much I had given and how little I had received in return was a revelation that came with a sense of calm. I began to plan, not out of anger, but with a sense of justice, for Larry needed to understand the consequences of his selfishness. Throughout our marriage, Larry had dismissed my concerns, insisting that I had no reason to complain about my role as a housewife. Now, faced with my own mortality and the reality of his absence, I was no longer willing to accept his narrative. This was my turning point, the moment where I chose to reclaim my life, however uncertain the future might be. I reached out to my father, who accompanied me to the hospital after my cancer diagnosis. Thankfully, it was caught early, and the doctor was optimistic. I wasted no time, eager to begin treatment and tackle the illness head-on. I asked my father to pack only the essentials from the house while I handled the admission process. Larry, of course, wasn't there. His work commitments, as always, took precedence. I sent him a brief message: cancer has been detected, and I'm being hospitalized for immediate treatment. As I sat with my fears and anxieties about the future, I couldn't help but think of him. Despite everything, a small part of me still hoped that maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment where we could face the storm together, where we could rediscover the partnership we once had, even if only for a fleeting moment. I often envisioned a moment when my vulnerability would tug at Larry's heartstrings, prompting him to ask, "Are you okay?" All I yearned for was a few comforting words or even a single visit, anything that would have offered solace during this difficult time. I couldn't help but wonder how he was managing without me at home, juggling the meals and daily chores. Guilt gnawed at me for not being able to maintain the household routines that had once felt so effortless. But as days turned into weeks in the hospital, Larry never came to see me. He had read my message, yet there was no trace of concern, no simple acknowledgement of my plight. His indifference stung, especially during such a critical moment in my life, starkly revealing the reality of our fractured relationship. Confronted with this painful truth, I resolved to abandon any expectations I had of Larry. With a renewed focus, I steeled myself for the arduous journey ahead in my fight against cancer. The treatment was grueling, filled with unbearable pain and discomfort. The harsh side effects of the medication led to many sleepless nights, and there were moments when I felt tempted to surrender, to let my frail body succumb to the disease. Yet, with each passing day, I discovered an inner strength that drove me to confront this battle head-on, determined to overcome the odds. Despite the hardship, this journey began to reshape my perspective, teaching me resilience and the importance of self-reliance in the face of adversity. Whenever I felt overwhelmed, The encouraging words from my parents, who reassured me that I was doing well and that things would improve, provided the strength I needed to keep going. Then, on a day when I felt particularly weak, lying in bed and staring blankly at the ceiling, the door to my room swung open unexpectedly. It wasn't a scheduled visit day for my parents, and curiosity piqued within me as I turned to see who had entered. To my surprise, it was Larry. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if he had come out of genuine concern for my condition. As he took in my gaunt face and hollow cheeks, a whirlwind of emotions rendered me speechless. I worried that the sight of me would only fuel his disdain. Without a hint of empathy, Larry settled into a chair beside my bed, stared at me, and then laughed. "So this is how bad one can look with cancer. Huh, you don't even look like a woman anymore." His words cut through me like a knife, draining the color from my face. They were cruel and utterly inappropriate, especially coming from someone who knew I was fighting for my life. "Here's a rewritten version of your segment." I wished fervently for him to stop speaking, but Larry, oblivious to my feelings, continued with comments that felt like fresh wounds. "Ever since you've been in the hospital, every day has been like heaven. The house is a mess, but I don't even have to go back there. Life is so comfortable without you." His merciless words cut deep, leaving me bewildered by the complete lack of concern in his voice. Though I longed to confront him with sharp retorts, my frail body held me back, and all I could do was silently absorb the sting of his harshness. I stared at him with a vacant expression, and when he caught my gaze, he laughed mockingly, as if his cruel tirade hadn't already heard enough. He casually added, "Oh yeah, by the way, I've already filed the divorce papers. I'll be taking the house. As for the division of property, you hardly have any right to refuse." Those words sent my vision blurring and made the room feel as though it was twisting around me. The emotional and physical toll of my illness, combined with Larry's heartless remarks, felt utterly overwhelming. Yet, in that moment, something inside me solidified, a fierce resolve to recover and reclaim my life from the shadows of his cruelty. Larry had filed for divorce without even discussing it with me, leaving me utterly speechless. As I tried to process the shock, he continued, "I've fallen for someone else. She's 21 years younger, and I'm serious about her. You're just in the way now." The painful realization that he was having an affair crashed over me like a tidal wave, but with his confession made, Larry began to turn away. "Wait a minute," I managed to say, but he didn't look back. It was clear there was no love left for me in his heart. The weight of that truth was excruciating. Yet amidst the pain, I felt an unexpected clarity wash over me. "I see," I said quietly, then let out a hollow laugh as Larry walked out of the hospital room. After he left, I faced my treatment with renewed determination. Despite the emotional turmoil, I channeled my energy into fully recovering from cancer and regaining my health. Those next 3 days may have seemed brief, but to me, racked with sleepless nights, they felt like an eternity. I couldn't help but wonder whether the divorce Larry mentioned was real or just a tactic to unsettle me. The uncertainty gnawed at me, but I continued with my treatment, holding on to a secret I believed would completely rattle him once revealed. If he panicked, I knew he would reach out. As I anticipated, Larry began to call. I found it inappropriate to answer while in the hospital, so I ignored his persistent calls, even when my phone was on silent. Frustrated, I finally sent him a message. "I'm in a hospital room, and it's inconvenient for my phone to keep ringing. Please don't call." The calls ceased after that, but soon the texts began. "Please, let me talk to you just once. I was wrong about everything. I'll apologize properly." His words felt more like a defensive maneuver than genuine remorse. It seemed that Larry, realizing the seriousness of his situation and the impact of his actions, had resorted to messaging me after I ignored his calls. All his pleas appeared driven by a sudden fear of the consequences rather than any true change of heart. Larry's incessant messages pushed me to a decision. When he texted, "Why did you accept the divorce so easily? Can I come over now?" I reached my breaking point. Facing Larry during my battle with illness promised nothing but pain, but refusing him seemed likely to lead to even more calls. Reluctantly, I replied, "Do as you like." My plan for retribution was finally set in motion. Larry, who had unjustly divorced me without my consent, was about to confront the consequences of his actions. I relished the thought of plunging him into despair. "What the hell is this all about?" Larry stormed into the room, his voice loud and laced with panic. To anyone else, his reaction might have seemed over the top, but given the circumstances, his agitation was entirely understandable. I had kept a crucial secret from him, and now the decisive moment had arrived. "I had no idea you had assets worth $15 million. Why didn't you tell me?" His eyes widened in disbelief as he slammed my passbook down on the desk, revealing a balance that spoke volumes. "I never mentioned it because you never asked," I replied calmly, forcing myself to remain composed. "Could I have imagined that a housewife like you could have so much money? If I had known, I wouldn't have divorced you." His tone shifted from shock to regret, and I could see the gears turning in his mind. "That's not my problem. It's your fault for not asking and for divorcing me without a proper discussion," I shot back, dismissing his feeble excuses. Despite his dominating demeanor and unilateral decision to end our marriage, Larry's selfishness persisted even in the face of my newfound wealth. "Why didn't you tell me? I wouldn't have divorced you if I'd known," he muttered, almost as if trying to convince himself. The truth was, I had built this fortune of over $15 million through savvy investments, a hobby I'd taken up to occupy my time. My parents had encouraged me to explore investing, and my father, knowledgeable in the field, eagerly taught me the ropes when I expressed interest. Though our family life had been comfortable on Larry's salary alone, I craved something more stimulating. I started investing 6 years ago, and under my father's guidance, I quickly honed my skills, turning a small profit into substantial gains. My father often expressed his surprise, saying, "I never expected you to grow this much." The profits I generated over those years amounted to the $15 million now glaringly apparent in the passbook Larry had thrust upon me. I had intended to share this news with Larry at the right moment, but my cancer diagnosis had thrown everything into disarray, and he divorced me before I could explain. I never meant to keep this wealth a secret indefinitely. Once I had overcome my battle with cancer, I had planned to reveal my financial situation, hoping it would enhance our lives together. However, Larry's selfish decision to divorce me left us as strangers, making it feel strange to disclose this information now. Under the current circumstances, it seemed clear that this entire $15 million belonged solely to me. As I recounted my story, I watched Larry's face flush with anger. "If I had known you had this much money, I wouldn't have divorced you. It's your fault for keeping it a secret. You owe me $15 million in the property division to atone for the sin of hiding it from your husband." Whether he was panicking over missing out on such a fortune or frustrated that he couldn't lay claim to it, Larry's demands grew increasingly unrealistic. Since we were already divorced, he had no legal right to my money, yet he couldn't seem to grasp that this $15 million was out of his reach. I couldn't help but laugh, which only fueled his fury. "What are you laughing at? Stop belittling me," he shouted. He had always taken issue with my attitude, but now he accused me of deceit for not disclosing my fortune. "My fortune," he echoed, disbelief evident in his voice. "In the past, a wife's assets belonged to her husband. You have to give me this $15 million, he insisted. I never intended to keep this a secret forever. I was going to tell you, but you divorced me first, I replied, striving to maintain my composure. Yet Larry dismissed my explanations as mere excuses, his rage intensifying with each word I uttered. His shouting felt like a storm battering me, especially as I was still recovering from my illness. Continuing the conversation seemed futile. He was intent on painting me as the villain. "Enough is enough," I finally said, raising my voice just enough to be heard. "You divorced me unilaterally. Remember who filed the divorce papers without consulting me?" I had always known his behavior could be terrible, but I never imagined he could be this cruel. Now, my heart bore the weight not only of battling cancer but also of simmering resentment toward Larry. His loud tirade was more than my weakened body could bear. I couldn't suppress my anger any longer at the self-absorbed man who sat beside my hospital bed, hurling accusations while wrapped in his self-righteousness. "Do you know what I thought when I found out I had cancer?" I continued, hoping to provoke some reflection in him. "I thought maybe this would make you worry about me, that you'd be kinder and reconsider your feelings. But instead, you didn't even bother to visit me in the hospital." His lack of empathy and support during such a critical time revealed far more about him than any words could express. It was painfully clear that any feelings he once had for me were eclipsed by his selfish desires and misguided sense of entitlement. When Larry had finally shown up, he had bluntly declared he'd filed for divorce without my consent and intended to take the house. His audacity to then criticize me for having substantial assets was nothing short of astonishing. I had said it many times before, I never intended to keep my wealth a secret indefinitely. I planned to find the right moment to share this news, but his actions had obliterated that opportunity. I had never blamed Larry as much as I did now. In the past, I had always forgiven his selfishness, believing that as a couple, we should support one another. I had never scolded or reprimanded him, enduring everything for his sake. But the love I once felt for him had faded. Now, all that remained was a torrent of anger and disbelief toward a man who only spoke and acted out of self-interest. How could someone be so self-centered? What kind of upbringing fosters such a lack of empathy? Surely, a person who engages in an affair and divorces without consent must lack serious consideration for others. I was too stunned to voice my thoughts, realizing it was futile to cling to any hope or doubt about the situation. Then Larry pleaded, "My girlfriend found out you have $15 million and says she'll leave me if I don't get it from you. If I don't secure this money, I'll be all alone. You still love me, right? Don't you want to help the person you used to love?" It was clear that Larry's mistress was aware of my fortune, likely due to his careless chatter. From his words, it seemed his girlfriend was just as obsessed with money, birds of a feather, I suppose. As much as Larry and his mistress appeared to be a perfect match, I couldn't care less about him now. No matter how much suffering awaited him, it was no longer my concern. "Please, I'll do anything. Just give me the $15 million. Larry continued to beg, but his pleas felt meaningless to me. My feelings for him had completely evaporated, replaced by a firm resolve to sever all ties. Watching him so desperate was almost comical, and I couldn't help but laugh. Yet, a wave of disappointment and sadness soon washed over me. It struck me that he had never displayed such desperation for anything that truly mattered to me. As our conversation dragged on, my disdain for Larry deepened. I realized any further interaction with him was pointless. Engaging with a man who had become so distasteful could only lead to more heartache. I felt foolish for once believing he might show up during my illness to offer some kind words or support. Instead, he remained oblivious to my feelings, his pleas echoing in the sterile room. "Please, I'm begging you, help me." I could no longer bear to hear his voice. "Please leave now," I said firmly. Even his desperate expression as he continued to plead felt like mere noise, an unwelcome disturbance. I pressed the nurse call button, explained the situation, and requested assistance in removing Larry from my room. A security guard arrived promptly and forcibly escorted him out. "Please, listen to me. I need you," Larry shouted as he was taken away, but his words fell on deaf ears. Afterward, Larry attempted to visit several times, but the nurses, well aware of the situation, refused him entry. I later learned from a friend that, unable to secure the $15 million, he had disappointed his mistress, who promptly left him. Now, he was all alone. Meanwhile, I faced my battle with cancer with unwavering determination, ultimately celebrating my recovery and discharge from the hospital. The relief and newfound energy that came from overcoming such a daunting challenge felt more precious than anything. I now enjoy a peaceful and fulfilling life, thoughtfully managing the wealth I had accumulated through investments, blissfully distanced from the turmoil of my past with Larry.